Our next speaker is Ms. Mary Mountstephen, an independent learning consultant and an associate member of British Dyslexia Association. Ms. Mary Mountstephen holds a master's degree in special education needs and has many years of experience working in primary, special, and international schools. She is the author of books and articles in the field of learning differences in the early years and primary sector and provides training internationally. Her current research focuses on the role of physical interventions in relation to early indicators of dyslexia. Let us now look forward to a research paper on exploring the contribution of a daily structured program to a screening and intervention program for pupils aged 5 to 11 at risk of dyslexia. Let us now put our hands together for Ms. Mary Mountstephen.
Thank you very much, and I'm really delighted to be here today with everybody and to share and learn so much from such a vibrant community. It's absolutely amazing, the number of different approaches and the enthusiasm that you all hold. Before I start, I'd just like to highlight that in the DAS Handbook 2015, which I know is available outside, there's an article I've written in there which actually describes more about Professor Crispiani's method, about the method I'm going to talk about today, which is called the Move to Learn method, and also about another British method called Move Forwards. So if you'd like to learn a little bit about an overview of those three approaches, by all means pick up your free copy of this. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about today is exploring the contribution, and it is only a contribution, of a daily structured movement programme as part of a screening and intervention programme. I'm basically a practitioner. I feel a little bit out of my depth today compared to some of these very, very erudite researchers. So I'm speaking very much from the perspective of a practitioner. This particular programme I've used in my own schools over the years, and moving from that perspective to a research perspective, I'd like to share with you that journey and some of the things we found out along the way. This is how I feel a lot of the time, and I'm sure you may well share the same feeling. We spend a lot of our time rushing from one task to another with little thought of the physical needs that support this massive brain sitting on top of our poor body. We spend a lot of our time with kids as well, concentrating on their brains. We have to, as practitioners, we're trying to help them to learn to reach to their potential. But what if we should concentrate a little bit more on the physical aspects of their learning as well? What I'm asking is that we actually adopt a mechanism which is as much about top-down and bottom-up, and that we need to combine the two of these to have a fully unified approach to our learning for all children, but specifically for our children with dyslexia and learning differences who often struggle with their ways forward. So we have a bit of a disconnect, I feel, certainly in the UK, where there's an increasing emphasis on the academic. Okay, so I'm thinking about what we need to do to connect our brain and our body back together again. What do we need to do before we do our brain work, or as well as doing our brain work? How do we do it, and why do we do it? Well, first of all, McClelland and Stein, who are referenced in the article in the handbook, would say that the sophisticated and abstract knowledge of the adult world is built brick by brick on the physical experiences in the real world. So we need to think about what is the research out there that is supporting the importance of the physical dimension of learning. These are some current concerns that I know are present in Singapore. They're also present in many international settings that I go to in the UK and in Hong Kong. So we have a lack of play. Obviously in Singapore there's a bit of a difficulty with your climate with having children outside for a long time, but we do know that children need regular exercise, frequent exercise, to actually maximise their learning potential. There's some research that says that sitting is now the new smoking. So I'd like you all to stand up for a minute, please. Everybody stand up just for a second. Give yourselves a little shake. Get a little yawn. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to just put your feet side by side. Hands by your side if you can. Please put your books down first of all. Now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. This is what I would ask a 4 or 5-year-old to do as part of my assessment. I just want to see if you're able to maintain your balance. This has been already implicated as a possible indicator of dyslexia. So, hands by your side, eyes closed, please. Hands by your side, follow instructions. And eyes open. You can sit back down again then. So I hope now just that little brain base that has, just bear that in mind, that sitting is not good for you, moving around is good for you. We have the problem with obesity. We have children who are basically not only exercising not enough, but also eating a lot of the wrong foods as they sit there on their iPads. And also in Singapore, I have been reading that 65% of children aged 12 and above are myopic. The source is the Singapore government publication, which is suggesting that the myopia can be addressed by more exercise, more outdoor play, so that the eyes get a chance to focus in the far distance as well as purely on a screen or a book at near distance. But the problems actually start a lot earlier. This looks like a lovely way to keep your child occupied, and you think parents think they're doing their best, but in fact it's time spent on the floor that is vital for integrating the primitive reflexes and for strengthening the neck and similar muscles. This seated position limits spontaneous movement, and this is made even worse very often these days by parents keeping their children in baby buggies. So when we look into 30, 40, 50 years ago, children were spending a lot of time on the floor with tummy time, with creeping, crawling and rolling. Now far too often I see very young children propped in these kind of seated walkers and even with an iPad in front of them. Please put them back on the floor where they belong. So what is my research about? I'm a qualified teacher. I've been a head teacher, but I've also qualified in other areas such as the assessment, screening and intervention for primitive reflexes. So I'm looking at what are the non-language indicators of dyslexia. And first of all, I looked at the BDA. I can see that there are weak motor skills, rhythm and sequencing, spatial awareness, lack of focus and concentration in the classroom, and poor self-image. Many of these, of course, are things that have been referred to yesterday on the conference and again this morning by Professor Forsyth, and equally by my colleagues from Italy. So the associated research, and I'm only putting here indicative research, there is more in the article, there's far more on my website if you would like to contact me. Professor Crispiani has just spoken about rhythm, automaticity, and the slowness of the dyslexic individual to get started. Professor Forsyth has spoken very clearly this morning about the similar issues. McClelland, Pitt and Stein talk about a concept called embodied cognition, which again is referred to in the article, which highlights the importance of learning from our bodies as well as learning from our brains. McPhillips, Jordan and Black wrote very in detail about the role of primitive reflexes in respect of dyslexia. Professor Olechowska in Poland and Barbara Phelan from Australia have both written about the Move to Learn program that I'm going to share with you. So what does neuroscience tell us? Movement programs work on the spiraling principle. They work on an overlearning principle like many of us use in our classrooms for dyslexia. What we need to do is we need to start from the base of the pyramid, and here we need developmentally mature sensory systems. Then we need to, this is the vestibular and the tactile element that is absolutely fundamental to effective learning. At the next level up, we have the vision and auditory systems. And sitting right at the top is what we're normally dealing with in the classroom. The reading and the spelling and the writing. But we can't actually work effectively on those skills if we're working on shaky foundations. So, what are primitive reflexes? These are reflexes which develop in utero. They're there to help the baby survive the birth process and to keep them alive in the first few months of life. So when you see a newborn baby being tested in the hospital, they may test for a Moro reflex, the startle reflex. There are other reflexes that are also there. However, if these reflexes remain active in the system, they actually begin to impede efficient learning. So from being a positive thing to help playing a role in stimulating and developing the cognitive brain, they actually begin to make learning more difficult. So you might observe, particularly if you're in an infant or primary setting, the W sitting. The W sitting is actually a very inefficient way of sitting because it limits the amount of cross-lateral movement that a child can make. It also encourages them to use one hand on one side and one hand on the other. And the young man, the classic teenage slump, please don't blame him. There may actually be a reason for him sitting like that. If he has retained reflexes that actually make it difficult for him, as he looks up, his body wants to slump up. So when you make him look at the whiteboard, his head goes up, his legs extend, his arms extend. Now you can ask him to sit straight, but if you do so, all his energy goes into sitting straight and not into learning. So when retained, we have poor coordination, balance, and impaired motor skills. These are going to sound very like the BDA dyslexia indicators. We have difficulties with automaticity and rhythm, keeping to patterns, finding rhyming words. We have difficulty with focus, and we have general difficulty and impact in the classroom. For example, they may not perform to their potential. They may seem bright, but don't get work finished. Their handwriting may look absolutely atrocious. They may write very little. This is very frustrating for teachers. But what you may discover is that actually there are physical reasons why they are behaving this way. And by using a movement program, we can improve their performance. So my project, I work with 5 to 11-year-olds. We used a range of baselines to identify at risk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the school community I was working with, where we planned together to put this program in place. I was there monitoring on a weekly basis, and we looked at what we wanted as the outcomes. For our screening program, we used Professor Fawcett's third edition of the dyslexia screening test, which is at this moment being trialled. Now, obviously, that screening test takes into account the more conventional skills, such as reading, writing, and naming skills, but it also takes into account fine motor skills, like she demonstrated earlier, and balance skills, similar to the one I just asked you to do a little bit earlier on. I also used physical tests which are related to the primitive reflexes. There is a screening protocol which includes balance, coordination, static balance, moving along a line. It also includes tests of the 4 main primitive reflexes. From this, I was able to determine which children were going to be most at risk across the board for dyslexia and also for Neuro-Motor Immaturity, for retained primitive reflexes. In addition to that, we used some visual perceptual tests, So we were asking children to draw age-appropriate shapes such as circles, squares, triangles, and diamonds. So balance. What Professor Fawcett calls an enduring feature of dyslexia research. What emerges from my reading is that balance is indeed a key factor in learning readiness. If our balance is immature or insecure, it may affect visual and auditory processing. However, I was interested to see whether the Move to Learn programme could improve basic balance performance and basic physical performance, as well as handwriting in particular, and other classroom skills. So the programme is called 10 Gems for the Brain. The whole programme is called Move to Learn. It's an Australian programme. It's a very hierarchical programme, so it matches the movements that a child makes in the first years of life. So each exercise that you do in school or in the kindergarten is matched, and as that skill is learnt, we move forward. It's systematic and floor-based, so if we go back to the neurological pyramid, we've gone right back to the base again. It's slow. So in contrast to Professor Crispiani's method, which is very speedy, Move to Learn concentrates very much on slow, mindful movement. And we've had long discussions about this. My personal opinion is that maybe Move to Learn, the 10 Gems, is better for the very young children. So I use it a lot when I'm training kindergartens. So we're getting children to think about the quality of their movement and how they can possibly slow their moves down a little bit. And then it's good to move on to the faster movement. It's mindful. It's also in line with helping children with dyslexia because it's repetitive. It builds fluidity, tempo, rhythm, and automaticity. It addresses the non-language indicators that we've talked about earlier. But also, we discovered that it gives success in terms of inclusion. It focuses on the children becoming experts in their movements. Again, a phrase from Professor Fawcett this morning. So as they practice these movements every morning for 10 to 15 minutes, they learn to improve the quality of their movement. They also learn to observe the other children and to instruct the other children. So they're becoming actively engaged in becoming experts. This is Treehouse School. It adopts a totally inclusive programme. There are only 15 children in the whole school. It's not run by the government. It's not run by an international school, independent school. It is run by two very experienced head teachers who decided that they wanted a different way for children to learn, and that they thought that this approach, the physical approach, was completely in key with their ethos. So here's Adam. Adam's on the left side of your screen. Adam came across as high risk across all the indicators. A very, very tall boy for his age. He looks about 14 and he's actually only about 9. So here you can see Adam practicing his fine motor skills with accurate muscle control. Because the theory and the research behind this is suggesting that physical tasks help us to lead towards more abstract goals. That we have to begin with the physical in order to develop those mental constructs. So the fine motor skills is done with the eyes open, eyes closed, and across the body. Then in the main section, the children again are repeating the kind of activities that babies would have done. So here, this one in particular is linked to the tummy time. It also helps develop the Palmar reflex in the hand. So we all know with babies, you can pick them up if you put your finger out. They grasp on like this and you can pick them up. Unfortunately, this leads to an awful lot of our children having the most terrible pencil grips. They hold their pens really badly and they write across the page. And as I said earlier, their handwriting is very poor. What you can see here is exercises that actually straighten the palm out. And what we find is that these kind of exercises combined with classroom work actually do help to improve their handwriting as they gain better control. So instead of the reflexive palm doing this as soon as something is put in, they're able more to develop a correct pincer grip. And that means, for some children, not all, that you won't have to use the little special triangle pencil grips. They don't need a crutch to help them. They become able to do it for themselves. How do I make this one video? It's gone? I'm trying to show you, I'm hoping to show you here, this is a kindergarten in Hong Kong. I work there with children from 6 months upwards, with the staff that work with them. And every day, what they do from 6 months upwards is they have activities that develop these kind of skills. So these are their 2 and the 3-year-olds rolling at the beginning of the school day. The staff have all been trained, the whole staff, so the staff working with 6 months old up to 5 years old. And what they do is they use this as an observation to help them so that they can start to see which children have not got good spatial awareness, which children are not following instructions well, which children are unable to roll. It's also a lot of fun. So these were the kind of measures that we were looking at. We looked at quantitative and qualitative measures. So we used the dyslexia screening test scores. We had the physical scores from the testing the primitive reflexes. I also kept detailed records of dialogues that I have with the staff there and with the children. And also I had detailed observation sheets of watching the children every morning and evaluating their progress and matching that then to their classroom performance. So my focus throughout this has been, what can a physical dimension give me that leads to improved classroom performance for all children, but specifically for those children who are at risk of dyslexia-type difficulties. So the next chart I'm going to show you relates to pre- and post-tests for 2 of the students. The 2 that you saw earlier, the girl who was doing the balancing and the boy doing the fine motor skills. The score range was 4.5 to 43.5. These are not standardized scores. Basically, the lower the score, the less the degree of delay or immaturity. So we're actually looking for the scores to decrease. So here we have girl 1. Girl 1, she scored quite highly to begin with. She scored 24. At midpoint in the assessment, she scored way down to just above 6. Boy 1 made similarly very good results. So these results are purely on their physical aspects. This is still a research progress. It's still in progress, so I don't have the final scores just yet. But in relation to the objectives, what we did find out was that the school was able to identify at-risk pupils in a way that was very inclusive. It was something that the whole school or groups of children could do together. It also gave us outcomes in terms of their progress on the dyslexia screening test scores, and also gave us improved physical indicators in terms of what the children could and could not do. At the moment, this is being written up by myself as a more formal paper, and it will be presented as part of my education doctorate at the University of Reading. So we go back again to further research. What I would like to do is that I'm going to look at a much larger cohort of children, aged 3 to 9. I'm going to revisit my original cohort in 2017 and 2018 to see what gains have been made. And I'm also doing a literature review of research in this field, and I'm hoping to attend in a few weeks' time. There is a very large conference at the University in Oxford in the UK, which is based around movement, primitive reflexes, learning in the classroom. So we're back to, by connecting the brain and the body physically, and also bringing an awareness of our bodies, The programme seems to tap into many of the aspects of the non-language indicators of dyslexia. It's in line with the spiralling, overlearning principles that we use in our teaching, but from physical rather than from a cognitive perspective. So what I'd like to take away from this is that this type of intervention appears to address physical immaturities that may also be indicative of aspects of a SPLD profile. As such, they prove to be a useful element in early screening and intervention programs. But they also address wider issues such as social communication and more fluid interactions with others. They act as part of a program. They're also a fun part of the program, and they take children back to doing things that they enjoy doing, that they have success doing, and then they're ready to actually work, survive, and thrive in the classroom. This is Treehouse, and I want to say a big thank you to them because they have worked so hard integrating this program into a meaningful part of their daily program. So they use it as part of their geography, their history, their vocabulary. Very important presentation yesterday about vocabulary. The teachers at Treehouse have actually learnt how to use not only the vocabulary related to moving our bodies, but we're going to move our hands like, and then they would use a tree snake or another animal. So thank you very much for your time today. There are some references here, as I said before. There are more in the article in the handbook, and I will be around over lunchtime if there was anybody who'd like to catch up with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mary Mountstephen, on sharing with us about your screening program, as well as how the physical indicators of dyslexia might be associated with physical immaturities. But now I'd like to invite Ms. Fanny Fu to present a token of appreciation to our speaker.